Well, hey, everybody. I'm Pastor Darin with Grace Centers of Hope and Grace Gospel Fellowship, and I have with me today the wonderful Jilly Bean. Yeah, that's what we call her. We call her Jilly Bean, and she's her real name's Jill.
Yes.
But we're so thankful to have Jill here to share a little bit of her story, her testimony, how God's been working in her life. I think that you'll be really encouraged by it. Anybody out there who's listening who maybe you're just at this place where you're stuck, you're jammed up, you feel hopeless, you don't know where God's at or if he exists because it doesn't seem like he's involved in anything that you're doing, and you don't know where you're going or whatnot. I think this will bring you a lot of hope and encouragement that those that are maybe without purpose, without hope in the world, man, there is a God, and he's a gracious God, and he's able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all that we ask or think. So,
Amen.
Welcome, Jilly.
Hi, Darin.
So, why don't we just get right to it? So,
Sure.
Obviously, like the Jilly that we know today is not probably how you've always remembered
No.
Jill to be.
No.
And
No.
I think when they hear some of your story, they'll be like, "Wow, so this is what Jill looks like today," but that's
Yeah.
not how it always was, you know.
No, it wasn't.
And separate and apart from the grace of God, there go all of us.
Yeah.
And so today, what do you do? Jilly works at Grace Centers of Hope. So what do you do at Grace?
I'm a case manager at the Women's Center. I take care of the ladies' everyday needs, like medical, physical, wherever they need to get to, kind of facilitate that. But I'm also their counselor, their cheerleader, their listening ear. Just, I disciple them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Point them to Christ.
it's a good way to sum it up. You're the discipler.
Yes, the discipler.
Yeah, walking alongside them and showing them encouragement and hope, and pointing them towards a new way of life. And so,
absolutely.
So obviously, it wasn't always like that.
No,
you didn't always have the freedom and peace and joy. Jilly is a very joyful person. You always got a smile on your face.
I do. I'm happy. I'm blessed. I have the joy down here, the real joy, not just happy joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell, where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Royal Oak, Huntington Woods.
That's in Michigan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, in Michigan, in Royal Oak, Huntington Woods. And then I moved to Royal Oak and Oxford and different areas, but I grew up in Royal Oak, Huntington Woods.
Okay. And what was your family like? And
my family, my parents were hardworking, but it was kind of like, if you looked at our family from the outside, you would see that it was like the perfect, son, daughter, dad and mom. But, behind the scenes, it wasn't so, I don't want to say pretty, but it just wasn't what it looked like. My parents had to get married. They were 19 when my mom got pregnant with me. And I feel like that was always something in our relationship. She kind of was angry that she had a child and had to stop college and that. So I felt that. And I always was looking for my mom's love.
She was kind of resentful maybe underneath there.
And I'd forgiven them. She was 20 years old. They were kids. They didn't know. But yeah, I felt that as a kid. And I needed my mom to love me and hug me and do those things, and she didn't. But then when my brother came along 11 months later, it was like a whole different story. I've forgiven them. They were young and they didn't know. They were doing the best that they could too.
So yeah, you're growing up in Huntington Woods. You got some young parents. You're feeling unloved. Where does that all begin to lead?
That led to it kind of. I'll get to the part where my mom and dad kind of spent a lot of time with my brother because he was on a hockey league and they traveled. So I would spend weekends at my grandparents' house, and that's where my grandfather ended up, molesting me. And it was weird because I was young, I was like 9 years old, I think, maybe 8. And he would take me to places and have me meet his friends, and it was really a lot of fear came from that. I remember I wanted to throw myself out of the car, like, because I just didn't know where we were going. So I feel like I carried shame and fear were just feelings that I've always had. Like, I not until I met God did I realize I could live without that.
Wow. Yeah. So
Yeah,
9
it
years
was.
old, this starts going
Yeah.
down. Was that something that was known? Did you ever say anything about it, or?
No, and it's strange because back then it wasn't. They didn't really talk about that. We're talking about the late '60s, and I never said anything. Like, I thought like I thought that this happened to everybody.
Wow.
I can't really describe it. And God in His grace kind of let me just tune out when these things were happening. Like, I would think of my favorite songs, or I kind of would have like be out of my body, which I look back now and I know that He was keeping me and saving me from feeling all that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's got to be super confusing. I mean,
It
as a
was.
little girl,
Yep.
and yeah, you just, even just some of what we would think is like the craziest thing
Yeah.
that's happening,
hmm
like for a 9-year-old girl,
It,
that's like,
it
oh, this is just a normal thing.
Yeah, that's what
But
you
you're,
think. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's what you really think at that age. You don't know. I mean, I didn't know about sex or anything,
was he
So,
like saying, don't say anything, or
no, he never did, but it was like,
you
I don't
knew
it
somehow?
wasn't, yeah, it was like an unspoken thing, and I really wanted the love and attention of my mom and dad. So, I mean, I thought that was love,
Yeah.
at that time. And then I was 18 and so for through my high school years, I didn't remember it at all.
Okay.
Like, that's another blessing from God. I just had a great time in high school. There was no memory whatsoever until he passed when I was 18, and then I started having memories and like flashbacks, and I'm like, is this a dream? Is it real? And yeah. So,
Yeah, and I think that most people don't know. I mean, so like we deal with a lot of this stuff on a daily basis in our
yep.
ministry and things like that. And one of the things that I have realized is that most people really don't know how often this actually happens. In
Yes.
fact, because of being in ministry, and particularly the type of mercy ministry and helping the homeless and the addicted and the abused that Amber and I have been in for so long. I mean, like I remember I remember reading a stat at one point that said something like a third, over a third of every woman has suffered some
Yes.
form of sexual abuse. And yeah, so Amber and I, when we were raising, when our daughter was born, we had made the decision, like, she's not sleeping anywhere.
I agree.
She's not allowed to sleep anywhere.
Yep.
And because I think it's so more prevalent
It's
than
so
people
prevalent.
realize.
Yeah, it really is. You said what, a third?
Over
It's
a third,
probably
yeah.
even more.
Sure.
I mean, because it's something that
For them to know that had
Yeah.
to be reported. And we know that,
absolutely.
like, to report it is like super
No.
low
Yes.
percentages of people that have it happen that
Yeah.
report it.
Yep.
Yeah, and then all the shame and the guilt, you put yourself thinking it's your fault, and all these different things.
Always.
Do you see that a lot in the women that
I
you
do.
counsel?
I do. I think the number one thing that they have to realize and get through is the shame. The shame and the guilt that's placed on them that they really don't, obviously don't deserve, but they just think that that's who they are. Like, they're not worth enough to be able to feel good or feel happy or have good things. They just carry that. So we work a lot with shame and self-esteem.
Yeah, so like for you, did you how did you begin dealing with that? Did you turn to
Drugs and alcohol. And ended up telling my parents. I think I was 18 or 19, and I don't think they believed me at first, but my mom must have believed me because they started getting me counseling.
Okay.
So my life was just never ending. Drugs, alcohol. I held on to jobs because I was a really good worker, and I probably should have been fired many times, but it just ended. They were always getting me out of predicaments. DUIs. They'd get me out of those. rehabs. They sent me to other rehabs. I mean, it was just continual for years and years and years.
When
So,
did you start drinking and using drugs?
um,
What kind of drugs are you using? All that kind of stuff.
I started back in the day, like drinking, and then there was a drug called Quaaludes,
Mm-hmm.
and I really liked those. And through the history of my life, I've like tried every single drug, probably.
Mm-hmm.
More so towards like pills, like Xanax, and the drinking and stuff like that. But I have tried everything.
So, like, you're a teenager, you start drinking.
Hmm.
Did you make any correlation at that point, or have you ever made any, or is there a correlation between like some of the abuse that you suffered
I
and?
believe that there is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just know that when I numbed out, it felt really good.
Yeah.
Not to think, not to feel the things I was feeling, not to feel so ugly and just so horrible about myself. The social anxiety went away. I mean, it just was like, yeah, I like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so through your teenage years, what it
Hmm.
starts to just get more and more until.
Yeah. It really got bad into my like late 20s, my 30s. It was just a lot of emotional breakdowns, a lot of alcohol, a lot of just my parents, helping me, picking me back up. And, I'd be good for a while and then I'd just go back down. And it was just like a lot of up and down, up
Yeah.
and down.
So yeah, this is like what kind of work were you doing in your
Um,
20s?
I worked for my uncle. I worked at his wholesale dry cleaning facility. And then before I came here, I was a engineering tech at Unisolar, which is a
Okay.
solar manufacturing
So you were
plant.
able to hold on to jobs
I
and
was.
in that type of
Yep.
thing.
Towards the end, I was doing a lot of pills, like pills to get me to help me sleep, pills to give me energy. I mean, the doctors were just prescribing all kinds of stuff. And I think that's, that kept me going. And that's really why I held on to jobs the way I did,
Okay.
Yeah,
So yeah, your primary go-to though was just to drink.
mostly.
And what did that look like? I mean, like in terms of like, what did that finally turn into?
Finally turned into in 2010, they outsourced our company, and so they shut down the 4 plants, and I lost my job. And when I lost my job, I lost my identity.
Mm.
And so that I went into a spiral. I left there in May, and at this time I had a condo, a car. I worked hard and I made good money and supported myself. Um, I left. We got let go in May, and I'm like, I'm just gonna take the summer off. I'm just gonna, yeah, why not? I'll look for
Yeah.
another. I get employment, and no, never. It went fast. Drinking every day, Xanax every day. I cashed in my 401k, blew through $30,000 in like less than 6 months, and I couldn't stop. I
Mm.
couldn't stop.
But prior to that, you had been to rehabs and stuff like
Yes.
that, so you knew that you had
Yeah.
this problem. Or not?
Mhm.
Were you ever able, in like through your 20s or 30s or whatever, to be able to like grab on to
Yeah.
some sobriety at times? And
I did. There was times, I'd have a year or two here, 6 months. Yeah,
but,
there were times.
but then you just would pick back up for
Yeah.
whatever reason. And
Yep. It didn't matter. It could be I was sad, I was happy. I mean, yeah, it was just so impulsive.
that's a reason.
Yeah. Oh, look, I
Yeah.
got a flat tire. Oh, all
I
right.
should drink. Yeah. Yeah.
No, really.
I got it fixed. I should drink. Yeah.
That's how it was, really.
And
Yeah.
so, but when you would drink, it would just get out of control, or what?
It didn't get really out of control until like I had all that free time.
Okay.
And most of it was just, like on the weekends or, when I got home from work, that kind of stuff. I mean, it was hardcore partying, a lot of concerts, a lot of stuff like that. But when I finally got laid off, it was a beast.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy.
And so, like, how much were you drinking?
Before I came to Grace, I was drinking probably 2/5 of vodka a day. I know I should be dead.
2/5
Yeah,
of
and
vodka a day.
with Xanax on top of it.
Like, you got to work to do that. Like, you got to earn that. I hate to say it like that,
No,
but
I know.
yeah.
I look back now, I'm like, oh my word. And I remember towards the end, I would wake up and I would be mad at God or who I thought God was. I was mad at him for keeping me alive. I just wanted to die. I'm like, I'm doing like enough alcohol and pills to kill a horse, and I'm
Yeah.
like waking up, and I would actually be mad because I woke up.
Right. Did you what was your idea of God? Did you like growing up, were you ever introduced to there being a God or a religion or Christianity, anything?
I know that I've always been searching for God.
Okay.
But my mom was Presbyterian. She didn't make us go to church. She sang in the choir, so she would go on Wednesdays and Sundays. My dad didn't go to church with her until way later, until we were grown. And I wanted to go. Like I wanted to go, and then I went, and everybody was just so cold and rigid, and it was like they didn't talk about Jesus. They only talked about God. It was that like just felt like you could feel the condemnation.
Oh, wow.
Now that I know what that is, like I felt worse being there. The more shame and more like dirty and I.
You probably knew you were supposed to be living a particular way or whatnot, and yet you weren't.
Nope.
So, yeah, when you're going through like this summer of what do we
Summer
even
of love.
the love for
summer of debauchery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, were you like what finally brought that to? I mean, I guess you said you were searching for God and whatnot. So
yeah, I know now that I was. Like
or something bigger.
Yeah, I remember dabbling with the New Age.
Okay.
And the unity and the universal, and I knew like that I had that hole, and I knew it was something, and that the drugs and the alcohol weren't filling it, and the money and the people and everything else, but I just didn't know what it was.
More.
Yeah,
there's got to be more.
I believed in God, but I thought that he was like those people. I thought he was like no. I if I prayed, I thought that he'd be like, leave a voicemail. That's what I felt.
I'll get to you
like,
when you're done drinking.
Yeah,
then I'll get to you.
But then, also too, I'm like, man, dude, he's gotta like really be like hate me. He can't. He doesn't want anything to do with me.
Yeah,
like, no way.
I think that's that's what's so crazy about the grace of God is I think that everybody just very naturally believes that the way to have a relationship with God is to earn your way to Him. And so it's so counterintuitive to hear about grace and God's forgiveness, completely unconditional, unmerited, and I mean, that's really, I think, because that's how we just naturally are. The world works that way. This is how it works. And so
absolutely,
God's got to work that way. And so did you find yourself like in this hopeless position? I would imagine drinking 2/5 a day, popping all kinds of Xanax.
I wanted to die. And so it got to the point where I ran out of money, and I lost my condo, and I sold my car, and just, I was good, one step away from homeless. I was homeless, and my parents at that time, they said, we're done. So they had cut me off. They stuck to it. They stuck to tough love. And I just called an old peer counseling coach that I had like a few years back. And he said, the only thing I know of is Grace Centers of Hope. And it's a year-long program. And
you're like, a year?
No, I thought, okay, I got a year. I can go there. I got a roof over my head. I didn't even think like, I'm just like, okay, I can get, I'll get myself together, get back to work. I'm like immediately like making the plans, and God had other plans.
Yeah. So what happened then? This guy tells you, or this peer coach?
And I called, and I was in Massachusetts at the time because I left my condo and went out to rehab with a friend, which no, we didn't rehab on the beach. We were living in this, crappy motel right on the water, and everybody was drinking at 6 a.m. It was like, okay.
This
Anyways,
is some rehab,
I was desperate, and I called Miss Joy at the time, and she said okay, and she gave me a date, and I planned it all out. My last dollars, I like got a bus ticket, and I got dropped off.
Wow, bus ticket.
Yep, a bus, Greyhound. Yeah.
Wow. And that was back when? That was
2012.
2012.
July 13th, Friday the 13th, 2012.
Okay. Yeah. And so like what was that like for you? I mean, where did you start to see the light, I guess,
Oh
or
man, it took a minute.
mm-hmm.
It's like culture shock, you know. I mean, I'm like, first of all, I'm so used to the guilt and shame and the fear that just like intensified. You know, I started thinking like, how did you end up like, you know, I went through that thing.
Now you didn't have the alcohol.
Right. And I'm like, what have I done to my life and that whole thing. But I saw other people around me that were in the program longer, and like we kind of had similar stories, or their stories were as bad as mine, but they were happy, you know, and they were like, something was clicking. And you know, I'm like, all right. So I picked up the Bible, and I first had to get a kid's Bible because I didn't even know.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
I'm
a
like,
good
what am I
word.
doing
Yeah.
here? And then I
That's
just kind
smart.
of progressed, and I'm like, there's something to this.
Did somebody tell you to do that?
No,
No,
I did, because I'm like, you know, it's
that's
a
such a
faith
good
based.
idea.
It
Yeah.
is. I didn't
To
know.
grab a
You know,
kid's
I
Bible.
pick up the King James. It's like these and thous. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I don't want to. So, anyways, I just started, you know, and I knew that was the answer. I did, and then the pastor preaching the gospel, like I've never heard before in my life. I didn't know about redemption. I didn't know about forgiveness. I mean, what? I could be free from that. And it took on a life of itself. God, you know, he radically changed my life, really.
Yeah. Do you kind of remember when that began to, like, the grace of God began to click for you, or that, wow, there really could be, or you feel like you
I felt
committed your life to the Lord or anything like that?
I did, but I felt it through the people, you know, the staff. And I just it's weird. Like I started with the epistles. And so like Philippians, because
Those are the letters.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I was always so anxious, so it was Philippians that I went to. And
Okay.
I remember my case manager saying, just like write that on your heart, just read it. So Philippians 4, 6, 7, you know. And I memorized it. I wrote it on my heart, and I just and I couple weeks later, I looked thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm not really anxious anymore. You know. And so I knew he heard me, and I don't know, something flipped. And then pastor was preaching out of Romans, you know, now there is no more condemnation.
Yeah.
And it made sense. You know what I mean? Like it like clicked. I think that was a moment. It like a light bulb went off, and it went from here to here, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just been a growing experience ever since.
Yeah. That's the Christian life, is beginning to grow more and more, and just really how lost we really are, and how great and amazing his grace really is.
You know, being able to look back at your past, and look at it like, look at what God has done, instead of looking at it like, oh man, look what I've done, dude. Like, oh my gosh, you know, which is how I used to look at it. Now I'm like, wow, that's only God. That can only be God.
Yeah, because you tried.
Oh, I tried. I tried everything. You know? Yeah. You look where it got me, you know? But like I was just telling one of my clients that the gift of desperation we were talking about. And if I hadn't been so desperate, you know, that is a gift. And it's like I wouldn't, besides hurting other people, I wouldn't change anything to be where I'm at with him.
Yeah.
You know, to have the relationship with God that I have. I wouldn't change a thing. I'd be homeless again. I'd do whatever. I don't care. There's
I love that.
Like
the gift of desperation.
Yeah. That's regen.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the worst things, right, could just be that God just allows you to continue in the mundane of the rat race of life, thinking, existing for yourself and your own pleasures, and what I always say, living for shiny things that rust.
Absolutely.
You know, just putting all of your worth and time and identity into things that just don't matter, you know, and so that that gift of desperation.
Yeah, that's why the gospel's offensive to those that don't have it in their heart, because it's like it's upside down.
Yeah.
Like what the world thinks, what the world looks at is, you know, not, and those aren't the important things.
Yeah.
You know, those aren't the things that fill you
Yeah.
up.
So yeah, you kind of saw this, your own desperation.
Yes.
That probably had to be life-giving to find out, like, because what you had known about God until that point was probably he was angry, if anything, or certainly not available or
No.
present, and
Mm-mm.
or that he cared really, right? Because if
Yeah.
he did, he wouldn't allow this. And now you're able to look back and be like, you know,
I see it through my whole life now. Even when things were happening, like the abuse and stuff, I could see his hand in my life. It could have been a lot worse. It wasn't my father. I wasn't sold or murdered or trafficked or anything like that, in a sense. So I just see his hand through my whole life now. It's like, you know, having the veil lifted, having your eyes open for real.
yeah, that's a gift.
Mm-hmm. It is. It
And
really is.
so, yeah, I'm sure that that's been, like just having been, what you had gone through and what you put yourself through.
Yeah.
How has the gospel, spoken to you? How does it speak to your heart now? Like, how has it set you free, and given you that joy and peace?
When I look back on my life, I see that everything led me to the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the events in my life have led me to the cross, led me to just to that freedom, the freedom that I don't have to walk in this shame and fear or worry about what anyone else thinks of me, and having that personal relationship with God, like knowing that even when I don't say anything, he reads my heart, he hears me, and really knowing that, knowing that he loves me and cares about me. It's not just, it's true, it's real. Knowing that's what it means to me. It's everything to me.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, he's everything to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you really find out that what God thinks
He's
about
so
you.
good. He's
Yeah.
so faithful. He really is. And I get to see it in the women's lives, I mean, and to see them recognize that it's God, because it's only a God thing. Like only God could restore a family the way he is. Only this could happen. And they see it. It's the greatest gift.
Yeah.
To work there and to see them know that God is really a living God involved in their lives, like in their lives.
Yeah, and he's allowed in a lot of cases. I mean, he's certainly not the author of evil or the author of sin or anything like that, but used your own desperation because he had a greater purpose for your life.
Yeah.
Had you never experienced that, you wouldn't be able to probably make the impact you're making today.
I can't imagine. I just can't.
So I'm sure there's people sitting out there right now that are listening, or they will listen to this. Maybe they have family members, or maybe you are the person that is drinking 2/5 a day.
Yeah.
Like, what would you, because I'm sure when you were drinking those 2/5, especially in the summer of love,
Summer of love.
you certainly didn't have a hope of
No.
redemption or a hope that there really is
No.
a purpose, right? So what would you say to yourself or to somebody else that's in that situation now?
Well, I would tell them to come to this, come into our program.
Okay.
But I would say that, look, I would probably share with them my testimony and tell them, like, I was where you're at. And I did not believe that God loved me and cared about me, but he does. Like, he loves you more than you can even imagine. And you don't have to walk carrying those heavy burdens, you don't have to suffer, because Jesus suffered for us. And so, like, he has a plan for your life. If you're still alive and you still have breath in your lungs, like, he's got something for you,
There's hope.
Yeah, there's hope. There's big hope.
And I think we get this is like the daily walk of the Christian life is the challenge of getting stuck in the weeds, stuck in the trees, missing the forest for the trees, and thinking that what is happening right now or what I'm feeling or what I'm up against this is the only thing that's real here. And, this is all that matters in this situation. Like I tell my kids who are teenagers that, and it's a real thing. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize like my daughter's feelings if there's something happening with her friends at school and all those things. Like kids are cruel. I always religious people. Remember, religious people killed Jesus.
For real.
And I hope that people understand the meaning of how
Yeah.
I'm saying that. I'm not talking about just Christians in general, but people who are just jammed up in religion
Mm-hmm.
don't really get the gospel at all.
Yeah.
But besides that, kids can be so cruel, so
know.
I don't want to minimize what, your typical teenager is feeling. But I can remember being a teenager and going through certain things
Mm-hmm.
and just thinking, this is the worst possible thing in the world, and I can't possibly imagine how I'm going to make it through the next week having to see this girl or see the whatever
it is.
And I try to tell my daughter, particularly, I'd say, I just wish that you could know right now that all of like the people that you're so concerned about right now, in just a couple years, how quickly you will they will be so irrelevant to what you're doing in life, And so I think I'm sure there are people who are stuck in any number of situations right now that just need to hear that, man, somebody like you were stuck just in a state of misery. That's suffering.
That was
to
horrible.
have to try to drink 2/5 a day is
and
that
then
is
wish
suffering.
that you wouldn't wake
addiction.
up. That's suffering. And
But if you could
it's
just
horrible.
know then what you know now,
If I knew then what I knew now, it wouldn't have, things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. There's sadness to some of that, but there's also gratitude, to that he brought me to him, and God brought me to himself. But there's hope, there is. You reach out, just call on him. Just call on him, if you just where you're at, call on him. Ask him to help you, and he will.
Yeah.
And then it just grows from there. He will show up. He's
and a lot of
faithful
times,
to show up.
I think that's him bringing people into your life. Community is so important to that. What is your, how have you grown in the Lord? Like obviously you started in a children's Bible, which I think is great. And then so how did that begin to work from there?
I just got like the hunger, I'm no theologian, but I just have a hunger for his word. And it's in my mind and in my heart. Like I think of it in my walk, like I make different choices now because of the word and because of my relationship with him. I feel stronger. It's something that, that I have to have every day, because it just keeps me centered on him. I can't,
Yeah, I think the Christian life is a lot like a bucket of water sitting outside in the freezing cold. Unless something's getting in there every morning or every day and breaking up the ice, breaking up the hardness of it to soften it back up. It's just its natural inclination is just to freeze back over again, get cold and hard. And having a daily interaction, relationship with God, particularly through Scripture. It's not something that happens quickly.
It doesn't happen overnight. No, it takes that. It's like when you're in love with someone, you want to get to know everything about them. So I knew that those were his love letters to me, so that's how I took them. And it started out knowing God's character, getting to know his character. He can't lie. So these promises in here, they're for me, it built on that. And now, I slack sometimes. I'm human, but it's a daily constant thinking of him, and scripture comes to mind in situations, or I know to pray when I'm like feeling some off, or if I'm going to be in a situation. A lot of times, with my clients, I'll pray before they come in, most of the time, and having that is just grounding,
Yeah, you need that renewing.
Renewing of your mind, for real. It's true.
Takes time. It's discipleship is a path we walk. It's not like just going into an elevator and popping, you know, up a
Right.
few floors or something. And that's why discipleship and in growth and grace can be challenging, because it's really the daily decisions.
Yeah.
It's the daily step-by-step walking down a path, you know, this
Yeah.
journey, and learning more about yourself, learning more about God.
Mm-hmm.
I always, you know, I ask myself a lot of questions. That's one of the things I do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so now why are you feeling that right now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why is that really? And then I try to ask, like, okay, so what does the gospel
Right.
say about what
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking right now?
Yeah.
And is that true? Is my identity really in what this person
Mm-hmm.
thinks? Or what is the worst thing that can
Yeah.
happen? You know, what's
Mm-hmm.
um, we don't, any number of things
Yeah.
that we set out to do, we think we need so bad. I mean, how is the gospel informing that in
Yep.
our lives?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were growing up, or maybe even during the summer of love, like, what would you have said your purpose? Like, did you think about things like what your
No.
purpose was in life, or like why you were here? Like, what's the point of it all?
No, I did, but I didn't. I just thought my purpose was, I don't think, felt like I had a purpose. I just
Mm-hmm.
to exist, you know, to live, to survive.
Work and
Yeah,
eat
work
and drink
and yeah, and
and
party and have fun. And I didn't have a feel like there was a calling on my life,
mm-hmm.
or I never really felt um like my job at, let's say, Unisolar, that was like, ooh, you know, God wants me here, or I'm supposed to be here. I never got that feeling until, you know, just the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think most people they don't really maybe ask some of the deeper
Mm-hmm.
questions about, like, even I think we all were created to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And if a person, a lot of times depression, anxiety, worry, um, they're tied, addiction, it's a lot of it's tied into this lack of purpose.
Yeah.
But they don't put those two and two things together.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Where I always say, I'm sure you've heard me, I've probably said it on here already, that where something doesn't have a purpose, like if there's anything in my house that is, I shouldn't say me, because Amber actually, I don't throw anything out, but if there is something in our house that has no purpose, Amber is going to throw it out, because it's useless.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and so it's the same thing for our lives. You know, if
Yeah.
you don't have purpose, then you don't really have a sense of value and worth. And, you know, that's always going to lead to depression, because you feel
absolutely.
useless. This is all just, there's no point. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so obviously you don't live that way today, right? I mean, through the desperation,
Yeah.
right? God brought you to this place
He
that,
did.
man,
Yeah.
Jilly Bean, I've
Yeah.
got, you have no idea the purpose and plans
Yeah,
I have for
you
you.
can't, it's like beyond my wildest dreams.
Hmm.
You know, beyond. I just, it's like, I cannot believe I'm so blessed to have the job that I have. I cannot believe it. You know, love God, love people. I mean, it's just, it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And you get to pour into people,
Yes. Yep.
make literally an eternal difference in the
Yeah.
lives of women
Yeah.
every day.
And lead them to, you know, some of them the way that you know, how it helped me, like, and showing them, like, getting in the Word and just letting them know who God is, who He really is, His real character, and then watching them build that trust with Him. You know, it's
Have you seen,
amazing.
there any like people you could point to? You don't have to use their names or anything, but just like,
My clients.
well, yeah, or just, yeah, people that you've been able to be blessed with seeing, like, wow, this person, they have no idea, like a month ago,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
where they were, and now.
I see it every day. You know, we just had Mother's Day, so I'm watching, like, some of my clients just tell me about their Mother's Day, their families, they were separated, they, you know, and God is restoring their families, and they're actually, the parents are telling, they're proud of them, they see the difference, you know, and that leads them to be able to talk about God is the difference, what you're seeing is, you know, the Lord in me. And yeah, just the reconciliation with families, I think, is really, on my mind a lot now because I have some women that are just finally reconnecting with their families, and it's so beautiful to see. Yeah, I see moms get their kids back, yeah, marriages restored,
Mm-hmm.
and just it's crazy. I
Things
mean,
that they didn't believe could
things that they
happen.
didn't think could happen,
Mm-hmm.
and you see them when they come in. There's no light. They're hopeless. They're just they're
Broken.
desperate. They're
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the rope,
Mm-hmm.
and then couple months later there's that light in their eyes. They feel it, they see it,
Mm.
and it's the same thing I felt when I came in.
Yeah.
you know
Now you're able to share that with others.
yeah.
People have no idea what's really at the end of the rope.
No. Mm-mm.
That's
No.
not what I was expecting.
Mm-mm.
To
No.
find God at the end of the rope.
For real, I thought
Yeah.
I'd just have somewhere to hang out for a year to get my
Yeah.
stuff together.
Yeah.
I didn't know
Little than-
I'm still here after that many years.
Yeah. So what do you see as your purpose today?
My purpose is to disciple,
Mm-hmm.
to represent God in the things that I do and the things that I say, and to just come alongside people, to love them and listen to them, not to judge them, just to be there for them,
Mm-hmm.
and lead them to the gospel, lead them to
Yeah.
Christ.
And see all that shame and guilt melt
just drop
away.
away, and I do,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that's what I'm called, to disciple.
Yeah.
I think so.
So how does that look like in your own growth and in your own, walk with the Lord? Like, what do you do on a daily, or how does that look for you? I'm just trying to think of what people might out there be thinking, like, man, I really want that joy.
Yeah.
I really want that peace.
I make sure that I'm a safe place for them to talk and to tell me everything that they feel free to tell me, and let them know that there's no judgment. I think that's the first thing, is building that trust, and then them seeing me, they know that there's something different and they want that. So just leading them to God and saying, this is what happened in my life. This is how he changed my life. Being able to say to some of the women, I've been through exactly what you've been through. I came out of the other side because he pulled me out. He rescued me from the dominion of darkness to bring me into this kingdom and the son that he loves. And just sharing with them, being open and talking about God, like really talking about him. He's not some back burner. He's a living God that is very, very the most important thing in my life. So I think that they see that.
So, to people who are out there, maybe that woman who's out there, what would you tell her to do in this moment?
If there was someone like me,
and
they were at the end, the desperation, I'd say, call us.
And then
give us a call, come in, and
what if they're not around here? Well, you can still fly here if you're out of state.
You can fly here. I would say, I would just say that I've been to, I don't know, 4 or 5 rehabs.
Okay.
I've been to every doctor, every psychiatrist. I've tried everything under the sun, and nothing worked except Jesus.
Yeah, you needed the great physician.
I needed the great physician.
Yeah.
I needed the gospel.
Yeah, not just any pill, the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that what would you say, what is it about Grace, so like Grace Centers of Hope, Grace Gospel Fellowship, that works, do you think? I mean, obviously, the gospel is the center of what we do, and I do think the gospel is the power of God. There's nobody far too good or too far gone for the power of the gospel. I don't think a lot of people realize how practically the gospel informs all of the brokenness that you're really experiencing. Like, having this new relationship with God really does directly impact your relationships with others.
Yeah.
And rather than, so people who are coming here, or all of us are experiencing brokenness in relationships in different ways. But the real healing for that is beginning this relationship with God that informs those relationships, or just your psyche and your mental health, in the sense of my anxiety and my worry and what I think and believe about myself. Like the gospel directly informs that.
Yeah.
You know, the scripture talks about whether are you going to live like an orphan,
Right.
or are you going to live
Yeah.
like a son or daughter?
Absolutely.
There's two totally different things. You can be caught up in tons of religion and be still living as a fearful, anxious orphan who's always afraid, tries to earn everything from scarcity mentality. Versus an abundant mentality where like I am his son, I am his daughter, in whom he is well pleased. And it informs like all of those things, or what you do for work and what my purpose is in life. So I think most people don't realize that.
I told Amber the other day, I'm like, I said, I believe that I'm walking in God's will for my life. And that's the most unbelievable feeling,
Wow.
you know? And I think that it has to do with a relationship. Like, I think how we're different is because staff, we have been there. You know, we actually have been there, and we know what works for us, and we know what will work for others, you know, and we want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So I think that's what's different about Grace. You feel that love when you come in. You do. It's different.
Yeah, I mean, you've got people ask me, well, you know, what works? You know, why is it successful? Things like that. I mean, honestly, it's like my answer is usually like the special sauce is actually it's just the gospel.
I know.
And I know that probably sounds so like trite and just like, oh, of course he's going to say that. He's
true.
a pastor. But yeah, I mean, it's really beginning to inform everything that we do in that reality of who he is, what he's done, and that it's by grace. People, I like to say a lot, you know, the scripture basically teaches that all of us desire to be fully known and fully loved. I think that's in the garden prior to sin entering into the world. You know, Adam and Eve had, they were fully known by God. They were fully loved. And, you know, when they were separated from God, they lost that. They began to hide, and they were afraid to be vulnerable. So everybody desires to be fully known, fully loved, but we don't really believe that, you know, that we can be. Yeah. Because if you fully knew me, right, then you wouldn't love me
That's
fully.
Because they think of God as, like you say, you know, he's got the Bible back.
Yeah.
You know? He's like ready to, you know,
don't you
condemnation, ready to, you know, beat us down. But if they knew that he just wants to have a relationship with us, he loves us so much. He just wants to hang out with us, you know, and be included in our lives. You know, and when it makes that switch to a relationship, it's life-changing.
And then for here, you know, at Grace Centers of Hope and Grace Gospel Fellowship, you know, it's that community of people that are built on that truth. And, you know, there's all kinds of problems. I like to quote it's Proverbs 14 something where it says, where the manger is clean, there are no ox, you know, which basically I always interpret as like where there's no dung, then there's no ministry. So wherever there's real gospel ministry happening, you're going to have major problems, which I was thinking about this, preparing for a message I'll probably share next week. Just about like what a gift that actually is that we have. Because we do have broken people here that are recovering, having their lives restored. And in the midst of that, there's all, you know, it's a real, what we would call a real New Testament church. You know, you've got, just read through 1 Corinthians and there's a real New Testament church, you know? But I think this desire that everybody has to be fully known and fully loved is only really quenched when the gospel is at hand, you know, in the sense that there's this community of people that are welcoming, they're willing to be vulnerable themselves, which begins to just tear down walls.
Absolutely.
And then when you're able to be fully known by God, you don't really care so much what everybody else thinks about. And so it's just so freeing.
It
you know,
is.
to
It
have
is.
that.
It's like the weights that are lifted off,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have to live like carrying those heavy burdens.
Yeah.
That's the most a freeing thing, really.
So I'd encourage everybody, get into a
Yes.
gospel-centered church, a church that just centers everything on that reality that it's all grace.
It is. There's nothing you can
you
do,
can't
nothing
earn
you
it.
can't
That doesn't
do.
mean that we just grace, as Pastor Clark would say. People say that, you just give people a license to sin.
Right.
Well, nobody asks for a license.
No.
They just do it. And
Yeah.
but the grace of God compels us. The
Yes.
love. The Apostle Paul said, "The love of God restrains us." So it's not like I'm saying just get into a community where sin is minimized.
No.
Actually, the gospel really is. It tells the gospel of grace says that you're actually so bad.
Yeah, you don't even know how bad you are.
You're so bad. The only thing that could actually help you was by God giving his own son.
Yeah.
So you are way worse than
you could ever think you are.
Yeah. But in Christ, you're more loved than you ever imagined.
Absolutely.
Because on your worst day, Paul didn't say, hey, on your best day.
No.
When you cut down to 2 pints,
Right. Julie, when you get down to 1,
yeah, I'll send
on,
my
talk to
son.
me.
Yeah.
No.
It was.
And when I was at my absolute worst, the worst of the worst. Yeah.
And that's what really begins to magnify God's grace.
Yes.
And so when that becomes the center, that compels us to welcome others. The Apostle Paul said something like, don't you remember when you were strangers, when you were far off, but God drew you near.
Like you say, it's we're just a bunch of beggars, like finding with other beggars trying to find food, or we're showing them how to, where the food
telling
is.
them who the bread of life is.
Where the bread of life
Jesus
is.
is the bread of life.
Yeah, because when you have the bread of life, you want to share it. You do. It's too good to keep to yourself.
Yeah. And watching other people freed from it. Well, Jilly, thank you so much for your willingness to be vulnerable and share your story. I know that there are people out there who are listening, who will listen, that need that hope. And I'm sure that Jilly Bean would be more than happy to talk with you.
Absolutely.
So if you comment on our video, or I don't know, I'm sure there's some contact information. We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
In fact, Jilly Bean also worked in intake for a long time, so she knows the process. But there are some women that are, well, if you call, they're going to connect with you.
Absolutely.
And help you and get you steered in. Maybe it's not Grace Centers of Hope, but it's somewhere.
Yeah.
But if it's here, we'd love to have you here and to help you. And maybe you have a family member, a friend, or whatever who's out there.
Absolutely.
There's always hope. No one is beyond redemption. No. Nobody is too far gone for the power of the gospel.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being a testimony to that, Jilly Bean.
Thank you for having me.